Advent, 11th of December. Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 to 2. Amongst Isaiah's dire predictions of the coming calamity of the exile, he also whispered words of hope. He spoke of a time to come when the poor and oppressed would be comforted, and the captives released, as well as a time of vengeance against Israel's enemies.
The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of the Lord's favour has come, and with it the day of God's anger against their enemies. Isaiah 61, 1-2.
Those in exile clung to such prophecies until their long years in Babylon came to an end and they returned home. However, although the empire which conquered them fell, ever more powerful empires rose from the ashes. Babylon was usurped by Persia, which fell to the Greeks and their successor kingdoms. Empires rose and fell, and still Israel waited for the promised figure to come, the one who would herald in a new covenant and epoch, rescuing them, the Messiah. Rising above all that had come before came the iron fist of Rome. Dominating all around them, they ruled brutally in Judea, setting up a hated puppet king, a cruel mockery of the true king they awaited who would liberate them. Prophecies, like Isaiah 61, which we heard today, were the people's sustenance, precious jewels they clung to. It seemed obvious who their enemy was, that the coming figure would come to defeat. The promised one would surely come and grind their enemies into dust. He would be a glorious military figure, bringing merciless punishment and bitter vengeance against the enemies of Israel. Ground into the dirt by Rome, the people waited in expectation. One day, a man walked into the synagogue in his hometown. Fresh from wrestling with temptation in the wilderness over the path ahead of him, he had begun to teach and minister publicly. As he stepped up to the scroll, he turned and looked at his audience, where his neighbours waited, people who had watched him grow up in their midst. Expectation hung like a cloud in the room. Word had gone ahead of this man, with many asking if the waiting was finally over. Could he be the one countless generations had yearned and longed for? Silence reigned supreme as he unrolled the scroll. His words broke the silence as he read from the prophecy of Isaiah 61, which promised a time when everything would be forever changed. He stopped reading with the words, "The time of the Lord's favour has come," finishing before the words they interpreted to mean judgment against their human enemies. No one spoke as he rolled up the scroll. The man gazed across the packed synagogue, every eye fixed upon him, and declared,
This scripture you've just heard has been fulfilled this very day. Luke 4:21.
The effect was electric. With these words, the crowd marvelled, rejoicing. He was declaring himself the promised one, the one whose coming would change everything. After all these centuries, could it be? Could the man who they had watched grow up among them be the promised one? If so, this surely would mean a time of glory for Israel and punishment for their enemies, led by this man of Nazareth. Their voices rolled around the room, excitement bubbling forth. But the man did not stop speaking, and his words painted a picture they did not want to see. He spoke of figures from Israel's history, who had been members of nations hostile to them, but who had still been blessed by God. His words painted a picture that showed, yes, he had come to fight a war, but it was not the one his listeners expected or wanted. He came not to defeat their military enemies, but to love and save them. He came not to fight a war of flesh and blood, but a war against the true enemy of his people, the evil one, who tirelessly worked to corrupt and warp all that was beautiful in humanity. He came not to fight a war of vengeance and condemnation against humanity, but to bring peace, mercy, justice, forgiveness, and salvation to all who would accept him. With his words in the small dusty town of Nazareth that day, he declared a new epoch had broken into the world, one in which Israel would be redeemed and saved, but so would people from all the nations around them, including from within their bitter enemies. His audience seethed in rage, breathing violence. The Messiah had come, but he was not fighting the glorious war they desired. Instead, his battles were to be waged against the rich, corrupt and complacent, and in serving the poor, the broken-hearted, those who mourned, the outcasts, fulfilling Isaiah's words from centuries before. Ultimately, this war would cost him his life, and in that act, he achieved his greatest victory of all, crushing the head of Israel's true enemy, not a human empire, but the one who had corrupted humanity at its birth in Eden. And on the third day, he forever robbed death of its sting. As we approach Christmas, the question still hangs. What Messiah do we desire? One who crushes our human opponents and those who are different from us? Or one who loves and is calling us to serve and to pray for our enemies, even those who we see as political opponents or would do us ill and spit venom at us? When it comes to politics, to work, and to all areas of our lives, do we make the same mistake his audience in Nazareth make? Or will we follow the Prince of Peace?